Cyberpunk Uncensored.
And we're live. What's up, Choombas? Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Forlorn Dopes with me, Cybersmily, and my co-host.
That would be me, Wisdom 000, Datafortress2020. Greetings, programs.
So before we get started, we'd like to thank Cyberpunk Uncensored for hosting us on this Twitch channel. Also, just to kind of do a little self-promotion, so my site, I added a new feature to the Cyberpunk, or the character generator for Cyberpunk 2020, a section called Lifestyles, in which you can track what kind of cash you have with your character, add some housing, some utilities and other expenses that your character might need to manage. So that functionality is there. Definitely needs a few little tweaks, but again, you know, my site is always a work in progress.
Man, it's beautiful. It's it's ridiculously useful. You do such good work with that kind of stuff. I on the other hand, after a brief moment of panic, thinking Datafortress2020 was not going to be able to afford to continue it. My fans came through not only with donations, but with very helpful suggestions on moving on new hosts. So Datafortress2020 has a new host, although it's the same domain, so same address and all that, and it is funded again for the next 3 years. Thank you so very much, everyone.
Yep.
I can't tell you how much that means to me.
Well, and like I've said, man, your site is definitely a treasure, and it is one of the few sites that, you know, kind of inspired me, like those other old school sites.
I so appreciate that, brother.
All right, so we're in our second part of our evaluation of Cyberpunk Red, and whether or not it is a good sequel to Cyberpunk 2020. So do you want to get us started? Well,
I mean, last episode we talked quite a bit. We got about 2/3 of the way through the book. We ended things talking about net running. We covered that pretty well. I think now we're on some trauma team action, the healing, and all that. And I gotta say, there's a really weird rule in the trauma team section, where if you get injured, no matter how injured you get, and then you make a stabilization roll, it heals you to 1 point, and you are always unconscious for 1 minute after. I don't know. That's like, no matter what, it's just 1 minute. That's just weird to me. Like, I get hit, whack you upside the head with a baseball bat, and you fall down, and in 1 minute you'll be back up.
Well, I think that is, you know, just trying to have some simplicity versus like just randomly rolling. I mean,
sure.
Randomly rolling or making some type of save every round to kind of get consciousness.
I mean, I guess like the 1d6 to decide 1d6 minutes, it really isn't all that much different. It just struck me as odd. There's also the idea of quick healing or quick stable, whatever. It takes 1 minute and removes all injury effects for a day. That's kind of messed up. Like, put a Band-Aid on something and you're good to go, boy. Treatment, like a full treatment, takes 4 hours and removes all injury effects permanently. That's quite a change from how things were handled in Cyberpunk 2020. That's pretty drastic. I can see how it works and is necessary with today's modern gamer, but yeah.
I mean, I even feel that when you're talking about today's modern gamer, right? Is it the gamer of 2020? Is it the gamer of this century? Right. So I think prior to even 2000, I would say before the whole role-playing game crash that happened, probably in late 90s, early 2000s. I think there was definitely a shift on playability, right? Because, and I think computer games definitely had an influence on tabletop games.
Sure.
Because you want to get back into the action quickly. You don't want to have a character who's laid up for, weeks at a time and being out of the action. And then, yeah, like you said, I think it was necessary to kind of do that. Logically, real world, it doesn't make sense. And of course,
I mean, it tracks with the rest of the rules in Red. It does. It makes sense in context with those rules and with that setting. The changes that were made, it makes sense. I get it. I get why they went that direction. It's a pretty drastic departure from the Cyberpunk 2020 to Cyberpunk Red, but like I said, I get it. It makes sense that's the way that they are going to handle that in context with everything else.
Yeah, but I think to your point of like the quick fix, removing injury effects for the rest of the day, like to me, if you get like a crit that kind of blinds you, well, how are you going to repair your eye to like lost an eye?
Yeah, I mean,
how are you going to really fix that in for a day?
You broke your foot, but I'll give you this injection and you won't feel that for the rest of the day. Healing looked kind of strange to me. But like I said, in context with Red, it makes sense. They want to keep things moving. They want to keep it progressing quickly. They don't want to bog you down with the slow times, really.
Yep.
It's a much more the rules of Red make for a much more combat survivable and repeatable game. 2020 combat was like super fucking serious and super deadly, to the point where people who hadn't even played it like understood how deadly it was. It's like Traveler, where you can die during character generation. It's obviously not that ridiculous, but it was up there in terms of system lethality.
Yep.
And Red, they've scaled it. It appears like they've scaled that back quite a bit. Because the modern gamer really like to fight.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of the now the 2 levels of trauma team, Silver and Exec?
In Cyberpunk Red, in Cyberpunk 2020, no character I ever ran. Well, okay, I'm not going to say that. 90% of the characters I ran and no character I ever played could afford Trauma Team. With the exception of one fixer who, yeah. So it's weird seeing Trauma Team now be this like affordable thing where the the AV shows up like no matter what, no matter where you are, it's just right there, lickety split. Like if you look up in the sky, it has to be like black from all the Trauma Team AVs just cruising around waiting for something to happen.
Well, I mean, the price of
Trauma Team
is not that much different. I mean, for the silver level, it's 500. I think in the original rules, it was still 1,000. And to me, this game seems to be geared more towards less money that the players would have, right? I think someone has called this as a simulator for poverty.
Yeah, the money in this game, that's a whole nother kettle of fish.
But I mean, the
difference between silver and executive is
not much, I know.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, when I was running,
I like that they gave more. Like they actually. Go ahead.
When I was running like Trauma Team service, right, and I think this is what most of the people I played with was, you know, what Trauma Team does is they don't take you to a hospital. That costs extra. And if you don't have health insurance, you're not getting taken to a hospital. So all their job is basically to stabilize you on scene, unless you have, you know, health insurance, which was even pricier, right? So a lot of players never had that. And a lot of players actually tried to avoid Trauma Team altogether because it was a monthly expense they didn't want, you know?
Yeah, I mean, in my games, Trauma Team was something the bad guys had access to. Like, they were going to come in to the rescue in addition to whatever corporate security the dudes had. Hell, one of my characters, his favorite tactic was there's a card you can buy in Cyberpunk 2020 in Chromebook 1, and it's a debt card. You can get it made to look just like a Trauma Team card, which, you know, when you activate it, you just break it in half. But with the debt card, you break the debt card in half, and it detonates. So he would leave that where people would find it, and then use that to take them out. Like, he'd minorly wound them, and then have them call Trauma Team. Have them try and call Trauma Team to come get them out, and then all of a sudden it blows up in their face.
Yeah.
That was one of my very early characters.
So, to get off subject of Red, like, how would you handle teams that had Trauma Team, right, and their opponents who also had Trauma Team? Most of my players never really could afford Trauma Team, so they never really had it.
I just keep getting this like comedy sequence stuck in my head of like Trauma Teams showing up for each side, and the Trauma Team members, of course, they've got their own Trauma Team cards. So just more and more Trauma Team until it becomes like a full-out war between like people who are contracted to this guy over here and people who are contracted to this guy over here. And God forbid that accountant over there gets hit. There's a third party coming in, and none of them are working together. Man. Trauma Team can become a confusing mess, I imagine.
Yeah. So what do you think about how they statted out the Trauma Teams now?
I mean, I like it. I like that they actually gave it some thought as to, you know, how the Trauma Team actually is going to work, and, you know, their equipment, their personal training. I would have liked to have seen that stuff presented in a full MedTech sourcebook for 2020. That was always on the back burner for me as a net sourcebook. Mark Cook from the Chrome page, he has an incredible write-up of a Trauma Team AV4, like with all the equipment listed out. That is a must-see page. but I never got, because I don't know anything about the medical industry personally. I was always trying to find somebody who was into that, who had the time and effort to really go into like a full source book with me. It just never panned through. Sorry about the rant there.
We probably should have contacted each other back in the day, because, you know, that was one of my main characters was a med tech. And I always saw that med techs were very underrepresented in all the splat books that came out.
Yeah, I mean, nothing about them at all. No rules for it, no supplemental material. Every now and then, like, the Chromebook would, like, throw a morsel of gear, and that was about it.
Yeah.
Techies, too, but there's really not a whole lot of, like, I can figure out what a techie does, and I can go to a garage and, like, look around and be like, oh, okay, that's probably pretty useful. A techie would probably like to have that, but, like, the closest thing you're ever going to get to a trauma team is to ride along on an ambulance. Or if you've ever been in the military, like take a look at the Coast Guard rescue ships or like the medevac choppers, things like that. But even then, it's really not the same.
Yeah. So to go on to, or to continue the discussion of Red, right, specifically around this, let's see. So they talk about the going to hospital. When you check for hospital, you're charged. Right, so that's interesting that for stabilization, you get stabilized at the hospital, not by trauma team.
Yeah. But it I don't know. Like, it goes back to paramedic is a skill as opposed to paramedic just being somebody who's really good at first aid, professionally good at first aid. Like, there shouldn't be two separate skills. And I think trauma team should be able to do any of the quick stabilizations. And then if you need like full treatment, sure, take them to the hospital. That would be like a ruling I would make.
Yeah, and I think a hospital stay would give you better healing. It doesn't seem like in the rules that it differentiates between a hospital stay versus, unless I'm reading them wrong. Versus just healing on your own, you know?
Yeah. Well, of course, you can't heal yourself anymore. You can't, I guess you never could in Cyberpunk. According to the rules, you could never perform first aid on yourself, which always seemed kind of weird to me, considering that I have performed first aid on myself plenty of times, even like fairly serious wounds. Like, one's ripped my stuff right open.
And it seems like they took
it wasn't pleasant, but man, you can sew yourself together with some fishing string.
Hell, any type of string.
Yeah.
But it seems like they
wouldn't recommend it, but if you...
Yeah. Well, as long as you have some, pretty strong alcohol around you, everything is good when dealing with wounds. And it seems like the body bank section was very limited compared to what was in the main book, or in 2020, right? So it seems like now all organs are flat price, maybe? And that was the other thing.
Here's the thing. I always thought that, like, organs, like, if you get cloned parts or scavenged body parts from other people, should be super, like, dirt cheap. If you can find one that's compatible to you, as far as, like, your body won't reject it, that should be dirt cheap. Cloned parts should be the next level up, and then cybernetics.
And when you're getting into body banks,
that's just how I've always thought it should go.
Anyone who's listening needs to go and watch Repo Man. That to me screams cyberpunk to a T, especially when it comes to, body banks. You didn't pay this month's...
I think...
Repo Man?
That's the wrong movie. Repo. You just want to watch Repo. Repo Man is the Emilio Estevez movie from the 80s. Or early 90s.
Oh. All right, Nick. Yeah. But Repo Man is still a good movie. At least at the time it was. It was very... it was a treasure back in
Yeah, it's a very good movie. I mean, anything with Forrest Whitaker in it is always going to be win. And you throw some cybernetic repossession in there, man, you've got my attention 100%.
But yeah, to me, when I saw that movie, I definitely saw like body banks being part of that. You get an organ transplant or a limb transplant.
There we go. Capricious has corrected us both. It's Repo Men. Repo Man was the Emilio Estevez movie. Repo Men is the one you're talking about. Well, we're talking about. And then Repo the Genetic Opera, which is... yeah, it's a thing too.
I have yet to see that, just because I don't like musicals.
Yeah. It got really popular with a certain crowd that I used to hang out with, and I didn't really respect their opinions on anything, so I've never watched it. One of these days I'll sit down and do so.
So it's interesting how they dealt with body sculpts, right? So in the original rules, or not the original rules, Cyberpunk 2020 rules, exotics kind of were their own thing, and you had to buy specific cyberware and alterations to become an exotic, versus this, which it seems like they've just put in a flat fee and you get converted automatically. I mean, granted, there doesn't seem to be any benefit from becoming an exotic, right? So it doesn't.
Yeah, it's not like the Chrome 2 exotics where they give you they basically turn you into a furry or whatever, but it's like they're just kind of hand waving stuff. All right, you want to look like an orc? You look like an orc. That's it. You don't get any. There's no real rules. I imagine that's something that's going to come through in some kind of Chrome book or something in the future.
Yep. So I saw a question from Leaded Coffee. Could you use an air hypo filled with the appropriate drug? Is that associated with first aid?
I would imagine that's how they're doing it as part of the first aid process.
So I got a tale. So I was at because of the whole COVID situation. I actually did a virtual con in which someone ran Cyberpunk 2020, or not, Cyberpunk Red. And I got to play a ex-bozo with an air hypo. And let me tell you, according to the GM, basically I had to describe what kind of cocktail I would put in the hypos to kill people. And it was very interesting in my description. But
that could go some weird places.
It can, and it did. That whole game went weird places.
That's awesome.
So if anyone ever gets a chance to go to TotalCon in Massachusetts, and again, I don't know if Mike will ever go there again, but he has been there in the past, and Mike Pondsmith does run Cyberpunk events at TotalCon, which luckily I was able to attend. So, and it's an interesting convention to go to. Sorry, off topic.
No, that's okay. I've done that like 3 times today, so
have you ever gamed with Mike?
About it.
Or ever
I've never met
him?
Mike at all. The closest I've had some emails with Mike, and some emails with Lisa. I spoke with him once very briefly in like a Yahoo chat or like a Yahoo forum. I forget what those were called. They don't exist anymore, but that used to be where Artal Sorian would throw out any announcements they had was through their Yahoo. It wasn't really a forum. I don't remember what you call that. But anyway, that's about the extent. One of my online players and a longtime friend, Joe Clack, Citizen X on the Joe Clemens, Citizen X on the View from the Edge forums. He went to Gen Con and he picked up the Kickstarter box for me. He had Mike sign that for me. That's
nice.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I have I had Mike autograph a 2020 book, a very beaten up copy of it. So
yeah, if I could take something for him to autograph, that'd be what it'd be for me. Is I've still got the very first 2020 book I ever bought, the original edition with the old art and all that, and have him sign that.
Right. And I think Wisdom's going to agree with me on this leaded coffee. So he mentions a comment about the air hypo, which is rules as written mentions characters that aren't medtechs cannot administer pharmaceuticals correctly. Seems odd since you can self-administer drugs today. You need to...
I was just administering insulin to myself like 20 minutes ago.
So when you get into any rules, right, do not always go by raw, right? As a GM, you need to take the liberty to go against the rules. One thing, if you do go against rules, you need to be consistent around what you go against, what you change, so that way players in the future and any players you deal with, like as you grow as a GM, as grow as a player, all of it is consistent throughout, right? So the expectation is this is how we're going to rule it. And you know, I often see that question about, you know, rules as written, how you deal with players around that. In my opinion, and I've had players throughout say, hey, the reason why I'm asking this question is because I want to be consistent, right? I don't want you to change your mind, and I don't want, you know, it to change. So if you do rule a certain way, if you're very forgetful, write it down.
Write it down.
Put it in a document.
I agree with you.
Put it in like
100%. Although I will add to that, do not be afraid that once you've made a homebrew rule, to keep tweaking that with your players. With like, don't just spring a surprise. Don't set down something as precedent and then change it without letting them know. But yeah, once you set down a home rule, don't be afraid to tweak it until it becomes exactly what you want it to be.
Yeah, because
oftentimes the first time you do that, it'll just be like whatever to get the story along. And then later you'll have a chance to go back and get it to where it needs to be.
If you actually go to my site, I have a section called mod rules, right, in which I've modified various rules to try to expand play. And trust me, Wisdom has a complete document around modifying all the rules for Cyberpunk 2020, right? But
yeah,
when you do
modify Unlimited, that is the entirety of that document and all its supplements.
But when you modify rules, I've always had a player who will critique it, right, from a power gamer point of view as well as, as just a regular player, and give me his observations around this. Like, oh, this is how you can break the system with this particular homebrew rule. And I'm sorry if we're going off on a tangent off of Red, but and that is a player you always want to have in your game, to somebody who you can always bounce ideas off of how can we improve gameplay. And again, the majority of players that you've encountered are probably going to accept it, abuse it, and not give you feedback. But there's also players who's going to sit there and argue with you about the implications of any rule you apply. And again, that goes with Red, right? So, I think our discussion together with Wisdom here about what rules we like, what rules we don't, we're always bouncing off ideas of, yes, this system has its flaws and it has its benefits. And how can you make that a good game for your players? And it's very hard to say, hey, if it works at your table. Because some players, especially players who are first coming into the system, they might not know what works for their table, right? To me, a lot of new players will prefer to break the rules and make their characters godlike and be able to do whatever they want,
It's good to have a player who knows how to abuse the rules, and it's super frustrating to have them in your actual game, but when you're trying to create any kind of new rule or system, those are the guys you want to get feedback from, because they'll show you how they broke your stuff.
Yep.
They'll lead you step by step through the process of breaking your toys. Capricious, I just the Chromebook, like you say, if the Chromebook hasn't released or they hasn't expanded drugs, the thing you're working on, that's cool. The Interlock Drug Lab Unlimited is actually Ocelot's drug lab from Mockery's site. Just to throw that out there. I worked with him to do that, but all I did was convert it over to Interlock Unlimited. And I think somebody else actually even did that. I have to look at it to remember.
Yeah, Mockery.
It's originally Ocelot's.
And I think Mockery combined Cyberpunk 2020 ones with not Atlas. Who's the other one?
Ionis. The Dark Metropolis stuff.
So Ionis turned into what's that other company? It's a new company.
DreamPod 9?
DreamPod 9. There you go.
Is that who they turned into?
Yes. You are the fountain of knowledge, my friend. Yeah, so
just about this game.
So DreamPod 9, right? Well, I don't know if Ionis turned into DreamPod 9, but they basically took their property and started pushing it out onto Drive-Thru RPG. But if you're looking for good drug rules, I want to say it's either Dark Metropolis or Grimm's Cyber Tales. One of those, both of them you definitely should have in your library. Because both of them have
I want to say it was Dark Metropolis.
I think so too.
Yeah, of the Ionis stuff, they were tip top because they were the easiest to remove the supernatural elements from.
Yep.
And they were the most useful in terms of looking at cyberpunk through a different lens.
Yes.
And filling out some of that gritty, drugs and Cyberpunk 2020, the drugs they were just this evil thing that your character never ever wanted to mess with because they were so bloody expensive and so addictive. From what I understand, that's Mike's personal decree because he is so very anti-drug that he just wanted like even beer is like Smash is like super addictive and way more expensive than beer in real life is.
I think Mike has changed his view on alcohol because I know he's a big Guinness fan. But yeah, so speaking of drugs, right, which ties into the whole Red, right? So the drugs of Red have actually changed dramatically compared to Cyberpunk 2020. I like
they are much more
what they've changed.
They're much more improved,
Yes.
both in terms of effect and their place in the game. However, they're still ridiculously expensive.
Really?
Not as bad as they were. Yeah, I mean,
Smash cost per dose. So to me, a dose is a can of beer, 10 EB.
Yeah. Can you imagine paying 10 EB for a single can of beer? I mean, that's expensive.
I've gone to plenty of microbrew in which I have spent quite a bit of money on a pint, even less than a pint of ale or whatever.
Sure, and if you start adding quality and brand and all that, then yeah, I could see things getting up to that point. But I mean, Smash, we're talking Budweiser or Coors
compared to like 2020, in which it was what, 100 EB?
Yeah, no, it's much better. Like I said, it's much better. In 2020, my rule for drugs, in Cyberpunk 2020, my one of the very first rules I ever homebrewed was drug cost / like remove 2 decimal points from all the drugs. So if it says 100, that shit's $1. If it says 1,000 per dose, that's 100 per dose. I could see that's still ridiculously expensive. Like that's more expensive than most of my players could ever afford to, like, as a drug, like to get addicted to. With Red, it's still expensive, but you only have to, I don't know, you can either cut it in half or again remove 1 0.
Yep.
And the removing of 1 0 is probably too much.
Yeah.
Like something like Blue Glass being $2 a dose. It makes sense in today's drug market that your basic a hit of acid would be comparable. But with the Red economy, I could see like $10 for a single hit of acid. I could see that.
I think with Red, right, it is, and again, we haven't really gotten to the fluff of Red, but to me, Red is, and again, we'll discuss a little more in the whole fluff section, but I can see from a commodity point of view is, this is definitely going to be rare, so of course market prices, you're always going to boost it. Now granted, I think with Red, the legality of certain drugs really doesn't matter anymore, because as long as you're not in a corporate held area, these prices to me stand. If you get into certain more restricted areas, the price is probably going to go up, right? Because they're going to make sure.
I mean, here's the thing. I don't know how much drug use you partaken in yourself. I don't know how many junkies you might know in real life and all that. But
too many.
Like a drug, especially one that, same here. Too many. But but drugs have to, especially if they're addictive, have to be at some level affordable. Junkies, even if they have to rob and steal to get the money for their fix, it can't be something that they've got to spend 3 days doing, because if they spend 3 days trying to get enough money for one hit, they're going to detox in that time. Then it's just not how drugs work. I hate that I have knowledge about this this specific subject. I mean, I have partaken in my fair share of mostly natural narcotics. The idea that one hit of anything is instantly addictive, even if they tweak it so that is like one of the desired side effects. Again, that's just not how drugs work.
Yeah, and you know, like you said, Mike was very anti-drugs, and kind of based off that rules. And I've seen that comment not only from you, but from a lot of people.
He very much did not want drugs to be like a source of entertainment for the game, especially if children were going to be playing. And I can see that.
Yep. But I think with these new rules on even a DV of 17 or a DV of 15, you know, I like that they put in the option or how they structure the addiction, right? Again, some of those values are probably it's all inflated, but I like how they did that. However, the one thing I didn't like about the drug section was compared to Cyberpunk, and again, this is similar to the nut running area, in which programming, they gave rules on specifically how to create these things, right? How to create a program. Here, you know, a strength is going to give you this difficulty number, right? The ability you're trying to do, or the type of program you're creating, is this difficulty number, and build off of that. The one thing that really lacks, and I've been told on various forums that, well, the techie does it. Well, no, the techie really doesn't do that. The techie is about gadgets. You know, when it comes to programming, it should be a netrunner. When it comes to pharmaceuticals, it should be a med tech. The rules... I
disagree. I actually think it should be a techie. It's chemistry.
But as a...
They're not applying the drugs. They're just manufacturing them. To me, that's a techie role.
But don't you think a med tech who has pharmaceuticals, who should have chemistry? You know, I mean, that was the only weird rule within Cyberpunk 2020, or sorry, the only... I mean,
I could see the argument for a med tech having pharmaceuticals, but in general, like, a pharmacist is not a doctor. A chemist is not generally a doctor. They may cross-train. You might meet chemists who are also doctors, but in general, the chemist is just some dude. The dude who makes meth is definitely not the guy you want setting your broken leg. You want to keep that far away from each other. Like, you don't want to do the meth in the first place, but Jesus Christ, don't go to that like 3-toothed dude like for any kind of medical care whatsoever.
Right, but if you have the skill, right, and that's basically what drugs is, right? Sorry, I'm replying to
the use of actual drugs, the pharmaceuticals skill would be useful to both of them. Medtechs would know how to make it, or techs would know how to make it, and med techs would know, how to distribute it to the people who need it. Like, it'll work on these symptoms, blah, blah, blah.
Well,
and working together is, I would think that would be the best way to create them.
Yeah, I suppose. But again, the one thing I didn't like was the absence of rules on how to create custom drugs, which kind of was implemented in 2020, of, hey, here's the strength of the drug, the various benefits, drawbacks.
Let me interrupt you really quick. Deadwalk, Datafortress2020.com from my website, and give your website.
Cybersmily.net.
There you go. Because we can't post that. And then Capricious comes in with the much
Holy
simpler.
Hell. Even
solution.
Cybersmily can't post. Shut up, man. Yeah, so again, with, I think, the street drugs that they put, and that was the one thing that, you're looking at Cyberpunk 2020 versus Cyberpunk Red, and some of the critiques I have is that there was things in Cyberpunk 2020 that they had that didn't carry over to Red. One was the program creation, right? In which you could specifically create certain programs. Drugs is another thing. And again, I know, it's covered in Techie, right? Techie should be able to create the drugs, but there's no specific rules on how you decide on a difficulty value of what you're trying to create.
Yeah. Once again, it sure would have been nice to have a med tech and a techie splat book.
Yep. I mean, I definitely think the street drugs have improved. So let's move on.
Now, we got plenty with Ocelots especially. We had several rules, homebrew rule systems on various sites to deal with the creation of drugs. The problem was with the 2020 Netrunner, nobody wanted to mess with that at all, really. So program creation just kind of took a backseat to stuff that was really hand-waved in the first place for most players.
Yep.
But yeah, moving along. Where we at? Well, I mean, if that's the end of the medical tables.
Well, I think we have cyberpsychosis. In that whole area.
There's not a... I think I said it last episode, but I'm going to repeat it this episode. I love that they finally, I feel validated that they now agree with me that certain things should not affect your humanity. Replacing a lost limb or a malfunctioning organ shouldn't have any effect on your humanity whatsoever. Whereas giving yourself a tail or an extra arm or lizard skin or whatever, absolutely full price. Replacing a full functioning arm, you're going to get hit with all that humanity loss. Yep. I like that therapy rules are now part of the core book. In 2020, they were not. And they didn't come around until Chrome 3, Chrome 4? Yes. They were a late in the day edition.
And they weren't very specific, right? So it seemed like with these new rules, right, they give you a bare minimum, right? You can't go below a 2 of cost. if it was above a 2.
Yeah.
Right? Versus the other rules, which was like 50%, flat 50% of whatever. So yeah, I really like that they're, and again, I think with Red, they really...
Well, I mean, there were several different kinds of therapy you could get in 2020.
That's true, too.
And that added to the confusion.
It did. Because I've had to go through this with my group currently. Like, okay, what happens if I get therapy? Well, you can, rip out all your cyberware. How does that work? Facebook, and again, the Chromebook really didn't address ripping out all your cyberware and trying to get back humanity, whereas the base book did, but the base book never really gave you costs on therapy.
No,
it's...
I very much like Red's therapy. I very much like it, to the point that I might change, use it for my Cyberpunk 2020 games.
Yep. And that's one thing I think Red kind of did, was really delve into some of these aspects of 2020 that really needed a little more clarity.
Yeah, the cyberpsychosis section is one of the bright spots of Cyberpunk Red. So they really took a deeper look at it. I've always been a fan of, the whole you turn into a raging lunatic aspect of Cyberpunk. Cyberpsychosis, I just personally dig that. I like the idea of a bus driver who, just keeps getting these little bitty cybernetics suddenly going apeshit and going berserk on the fucking streets. I like that.
Yep.
But I also like the idea of it affecting people in other ways. And they, like I said, they just really took a really in-depth look at cyberpsychosis and trauma itself, like mental trauma.
Yeah. And that's the one thing I like about
Red. They really looked
Red,
at it from both a physical and a mental. Yeah.
that they added that mental trauma.
I gotta say that their cyberpsychosis may be my favorite updated to Red section of the book.
See, while reviewing those rules, I'm wondering if they actually looked at Ionis/DreamPod 9's books on how they approached humanity, right? So, and again, I'm not promoting those books.
I like to think they looked at my site, but that's just me being me. I'm sure it had much more to do with Dark Metropolis and all that. So,
not necessarily we're paid advertisers of these books, but they're definitely books that helped us, or at least inspired us as GMs back in the day. To see.
I mean, don't get me.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, just to see how those rules really expand cyberpsychosis, and they also got into stress and how the world can really affect your humanity. So those rules were very interesting on how to create, a very mental health type of system on your characters, which I loved about that game, or those additional rules. It's just, a lot of my players didn't like it because it seems, I have to add more, right, to my bookkeeping. But
yeah,
I just loved how they approached the whole cyberpsychosis, stress, and the degradation of humanity.
They were definitely going for a much darker feel. Now, they kind of shot themselves in the foot with that darker feel with some of the worst gaming art I've ever seen. I mean, most of it was really atrocious. No offense to the artists, it wasn't my bag. I did not enjoy looking at it. Plus, under no circumstances would I ever allow anything supernatural, super heroic, of any. Yeah, I would never allow that in my game. No psychics, no nothing. I know a lot of people will disagree with me on that. They're all like, well, whatever, mixed genres is awesome. I'm just not that guy.
Yeah,
but the books themselves, most of those Ionis books had really great ideas.
Yeah, so to me, those adventures were definitely steeped into the whole supernatural thing. But like Dark Metropolis, Grimm's Cyber Tales, those to me were, they kind of borderlined into the whole supernatural, but they had a lot of juicy, real, meaty stuff. Whether it came to the cyberpsychosis, the drug rules, they even got into even the drug addicts, right? Or the brain dance people. And again, I'm not trying to promote those books, but it's definitely one of those things that you want to put in your arsenal.
Yeah, and because they were off-brand, most of them can still be found fairly cheap on eBay and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, not only eBay, but Drive-Thru RPG has most of them. At least the Grim Cyber Tales and the Dark Metropolis. So I think that covers most of the rules except for the night markets. I think we get mostly into the fluff.
I mean, the night markets just seem to grab all the tables from the previous sections and just reprint them for the most part.
Yeah, but the whole concept
I like the idea of the night markets. It seems weird that it really likes to present that as being the only way to shop for stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's... So, I think once we're starting to get into this, we're getting into the fluff, right?
We are now fully in fluff territory.
Yeah, so from a fluff point of view, right, of very limited access to resources, it definitely is a cyberpunk concept, but how it's done is basically 20-ish years after the fourth corporate war, right? After the nuke that hit. Some of the stuff I disagree with, because if you look through history of what happened to Hiroshima and I forgot the name. Nagasaki, right? So people were living there a year after the bombs dropped, right? And those bombs weren't as big as the tower bombs. So
no, those bombs were bigger actually than the tower bomb. The tower bomb in Arasaka was like a little suitcase thing that they made it to. Okay, we're gonna have to talk about the nuke because that leads into the whole time of the red thing. So I understand in the books that there's a lot of other stuff going along, like a lot of other stuff that went into the effects of the time of the red, air quotation marks. But the idea of the bomb that they described, both in Firestorm and in Red, and in Cyberpunk 2077, the bomb that they describe is this little bitty thing. But the effects of it are like full-blown, like nuclear Armageddon type effects, where the worldwide sky turned red for years, and like we've dropped bombs before. Like, there have been nuclear detonations, many of them. Yeah. And none of them have done this. So
I think
there's a lot of stuff that's going on with Cyberpunk Red's fluff that I just look at kind of weird.
I think it's the fantasy of nuclear detonation, right? So like Chernobyl, right? Let's talk about Chernobyl. So Chernobyl is still a very hot zone, and apparently it's gotten hotter because of something, and I really didn't dig into the article. However,
Fukushima is still a mess.
Fukushima is still a mess. They still have hot zones there. But like even...
those are different. Those aren't nuclear explosions. Those are reactor meltdowns.
Right. But I think the cons and I don't know if it's something from like Akira, on like, how Akira, they had the explosion so many decades previously.
There is Akira took place in 2019, so...
Well, when did the nuclear bomb happen in Akira?
1994, I think. I don't know. It's been a while since I paid that much attention to it. But it wasn't that long. It certainly wasn't the distance in time between Red and 2020.
Right.
Or 2025.
To me, I think that's the whole... And even in Cyberpunk 2020... you had the New York City that was bombed in 1999, and it's still a hot zone to 2020, right? It's still not livable.
But even then, it's just Manhattan, and it's not even all of Manhattan that they describe.
Right.
But yeah, Manhattan gets fucked up, but the rest of New York is fine.
So...
and the reason Manhattan gets so messed up is because it's literally built on... Manhattan is literally an artificial island. To the point that they have to run, their sewers and subways have to run water pumps constantly, or they all flood.
So Capricious says that their Arasaka had a nuclear reactor that melted down. Okay. Maybe?
That is, yeah...
If that happens...
That would make the areas directly around it hot, but it's not going to turn the sky red.
Yeah. Multiple nuclear bombs could probably do that, right? In multiple areas. And again, I think, with the firestorm...
No, not even that. We've done that. We've had multiple nuclear detonations go off. We tested that shit for years, decades, and none of it turned the sky red.
Let's give them some...
It made certain areas fairly uninhabitable for quite a while.
Yeah, but
the Marshall Islands, nobody's living there anymore.
But again, let's give them the fantasy, right?
Sure. I get it. They want to create a gritty environment. It just...
Right. So
and I'm being really nitpicky about something that's really unimportant. They wanted the environment to be this, so they gave us this reason, and that works. I do the same thing. I'm not gonna lie. I come up with some goofy reasons for why things happen in my games.
Right. So think about what the fourth corporate war really did to the world. And again, according to our Talsorian, it destroyed shipping lines, and that is one thing that I'm currently playing out within my Cyberpunk 2020 game. Is there in January of 2022, right? So the Shadow War is about to start, and how it evolves to the whole global war that turns Arasaka and Militech against each other.
In my game, I just ignored it completely. There was no fourth corporate war in my game.
I am playing right into it on how it's going to change the world, right? To become red. What does it mean, right? So currently in my game, and I don't want to give any spoilers out, right, is I'm following the history of the whole war and trying to play into that. Like, to me, Arasaka is taking over Night City at this point, and getting rid of Militech, right? So in 2022, early 2022, Arasaka is basically eliminating Militech out of the Pac Rim, right, and getting them out. There's big wars happening in South Am around Arasaka-controlled governments, and Militech trying to deal with them. And I think with the whole Red concept of, okay, when the big boys start playing, the little boys are going to start doing tit for tat as well. So I can definitely see
they're gonna come out like scavengers and pick up the pieces.
Well, not only pick up the pieces, but hey, we're going to maybe give intel to Arasaka to blow up this facility of my enemy, right? That supposedly Militech has influence in. So that whole, not only the two big boys playing against each other, but the other corporations manipulating those big boys to fight to basically destroy their own adversaries, right? So the smaller corporations, whether it be Infotech, EBM, IEC, all the various cybernetic corporations trying to vie for dominance. However, again, like today's corporations, they're very narrow-sighted, right? So they're like, hey, you get rid of my enemy, I'm good. They don't understand the repercussions of what that means. A, to the economy. B, to the
it's all
environment.
Like immediate result. And I wanted to clarify, I don't have anything against the Stormfront books. I thought they were very well written. They just took the game in a different direction than I wanted my personal game to go. So I've included the tech and like some of the events from it. For the most part, there was no fourth corporate war in my game, but that was just because I've spent so much time on my own game world, and that's just what I've run since the beginning.
Yeah, and I remember, I forget who it was. It might have been, it was some YouTubers, whether it was Mr. Welsh, who, by the way, if you don't know who Mr. Welsh is, check him out on YouTube. It has great cyberpunk rundown of every single supplement of cyberpunk. Go check him out.
Busy guy.
Yeah. He also does a lot of D&D Mystaria, but, if that's your cup of tea, by all means listen to his stuff. But I believe in one interview with him, he was like, don't destroy the meta world, right? And I think that's what Altarsurian did when they came with the fourth corporate world, right? Is they destroyed the world, as it were. And again, I don't know at that time.
I mean, that's ultimately why V3 didn't work. Is it was such a departure. Like V3, if they hadn't named it in Cyberpunk, V3 probably would have been a very successful game. That and the art. But there were a lot of great ideas. They just weren't Cyberpunk ideas, and they certainly weren't the follow-up to 2020 that anybody was really looking for. And they toned back a lot of the wackiness with Red, and made it much more of a straightforward, like it makes sense, like given the events of Cyberpunk 2020, that the world could end up in this place. Like Red makes sense. I was really, really pleasantly surprised. I had thought I had thought for sure that, I don't know why I thought this, maybe it was, I don't know. I had thought for sure that the paper virus from V3 was going to be part of the Red timeline, and it wasn't. Like, it wasn't talked about at all. I think maybe I might have gotten it confused with the Carbon Plague, which was briefly mentioned, but with no real consequence. So I was really pleasantly surprised that didn't make it into Red.
Yeah.
I really did not like that idea.
Yeah, and to me, the whole destruction of the whole infrastructure of the world, right? To me, Carbon Plague would spread like wildfire, you know?
Yeah.
If you destroy communication, infrastructure, especially with resupplying areas, any plague, any disease is going to run rampant. And it's going to severely impact everything. Again, with the Fourth Corporate War, it was definitely a world war that affected all of America, all of, I would say, South America, Asia. Definitely, the majority of Asia has been impacted, in Europe. From Red, or Africa kind of was isolated, right, and became kind of that conduit into space. And that's another thing that I'm going to kind of play with is how the High Riders took over space. And again, there's always this weird retcon of what Deep Space did and what Red is doing.
Yeah.
With space.
What's weird is, if I recall correctly, Deep Space takes place in 2027, which is supposedly after the Fourth Corporate War. But yeah. I don't know. The timeline surrounding Deep Space gets kind of weird. Right. But it's still a fantastic book.
Definitely is. And if you want inspiration for Deep Space and space, definitely go see The Expanse.
Watch The Expanse!
Remove the whole alien element, because to me, cyberpunk is
faster
not
than light travel.
Yeah.
Just, but the spacer culture in that show is just spot on.
Yeah.
The Expanse, and there's an old movie called Outland starring Sean Connery.
I love that
It's
movie.
a really good look at spacer culture too. It's fantastic.
The movie is a little dated.
It's yeah,
visually,
but it's ridiculously underrated.
Yes, especially for what it was. It was basically a colony, I think, on one of the Jupiter moons, in which there was a drug
rack. It was someplace way out there. They're on a it's a mining station that they've built up on a asteroid, basically, or one of the moons. Yeah, no, it was an asteroid.
And it is definitely cyberpunk to a T. So anyone
like it the artificial gravity in the movie is kind of nonsense, but it's to be expected. You're never gonna see a show with like realistic artificial gravity on any kind of real scale. Like, the closest you're gonna get really is Deep Horizon or Event Horizon.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're getting way off topic. Back to the fluff.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk is always like Cyberpunk 2020. Like, the core books, the core fluff has always had this notion that somehow the corporations are more powerful than the U.S. military, and I can't buy into that. I've never been able to buy into it. Maybe in the time of Red, I could buy into it, when the United States has been so fractured for so very long. That would kind of make sense. It didn't make sense to me at all in 2020. Like, the military's not going anywhere. We spend so much money on them that, yeah, there's not a corporation in the world that's going to outgun the U.S. military.
Well, according to the fluff of 2020,
in red, that makes sense.
According to the fluff of 2020, the American military is still stronger than any corporation, right? And they basically nationalized Militech. So it's very weird when it comes to the logic of it, and how to make sense.
I mean, I get that they want to make corporations and whatnot like the super big, bad, powerful thing, because like boil away all the extras for most cyberpunk media, and it's almost always going to come down to like individuals against the corporations.
Yep.
As opposed to individuals against the government. That's just the type of vibe they want to throw out.
So the one thing I think about,
it's in red. I can see it actually happen.
So the thing with the red fluff, right? I could see you enjoying the prominence of the Nomad being kind of the transporter lifeline of all the cities within the world.
I'm torn on the way Nomads are presented, because obviously Nomads are my favorite character class. Like, I love Nomads. I'm running a Nomad-based game right now. That is definitely getting turned into basically an adventure / source book. The idea that they're the ones who handle all the shipping, though, at that point, they're no longer really Nomads. At that point, they're just a shipping business. At that point, they're going to have all the contracts in place and like salaries and stuff like that. They're not really what we think of as Nomads from a 2020 perspective. They're a kind of a different creature altogether, which is also, I guess, why family is no longer represented in like, you can go to your Nomad pack and have them do this stuff for you, or look to them for help. Now it's pretty much just about what vehicle you can drive, because the entirety of Nomad culture is now shipping and moving stuff from one place to the next. So it's a different creature. It's less Mad Max and more Convoy, I guess. So I'm kind of torn on that. It's got some great ideas. But it's one of those things that it takes me a minute to really wrap my head around.
Right. I mean, I like how
it's like going to the ice cream shop and wanting chocolate, and they give you butterscotch, which I love me some butterscotch, don't get me wrong, but it's not chocolate.
Right. I like how, at least from 2020 to 2045 to 2077, how the story of the Nomad evolved, right? So it went from, hey, these are these guys who live on the fringe of society. 2020 or 2045, they became a very essential and very needed group, and then in 2077, they became this outcast of a society of all you
they're
guys
back
are just
to
a bunch
living
of
on the
bandits.
fringe.
Yeah. So I like that story arc.
I mean, it went full circle. The 2077 Nomads are much closer to the 2020 Nomads than the 2045 Nomads.
Yep. So what do you think about the whole thing with the corporations and how they, in Red, kind of split up? Not necessarily just some corporations split up, some corporations were destroyed, some corporations were absorbed, and then the whole concept of...
There were changes. I don't... Arasaka being the token bad guy to me has never really sat well, especially in terms of the Fourth Corporate War. The nuke was all Militech's fault, and the players were terrorists. That does not sit well with me. The fact that every freaking news story out there calls Johnny Silverhand a terrorist in 2077, and everybody refers to him as a terrorist, they're correct. He set off a nuke in the middle of a populated area. Like, there's nothing cool about that. I don't get why Arasaka gets blamed for it, other than, well, I mean, U.S. propaganda. And Militech being a U.S. company, they're going to prop that up with nationalism. And Militech has always been the worst of the two for me, as far as, you know, which one I would trust. Biotechnica. They're playing Biotechnica out to be a good guy in Red, like a fairly benevolent corporation. They came in and, I guess, saved the world with their food. In my games, Biotechnica is the most evil corporation in my game, like by far. They are Monsanto crossed with like Dole fruit and Nestle. They're just evil. Sure, they do stuff that feeds the world, but it comes at a pretty steep cost.
So what do you think of Biotechnica introducing the whole new genetic animals into the wild? I mean, that sounded interesting, but it also sounded a little fantasy edge, right?
Yeah. Everybody wants their anime kitties. I get it. I like anime kitties too. I don't know that I'd make them wild animals in Cyberpunk, but I get it. I get it. I mean, that's always been an aspect that's been kind of present in R. Talsorian's work. I mean, heck, their first published system was Teenagers from Outer Space, which was completely based on, you know,
was thinking about
anime of the time.
So for Red campaign / quick game, I was thinking of doing a hunting expedition against a Biotechnica genetically engineered animal, right? Kind of like what they do.
Well, I mean, Cyberpunk itself is so, yeah, no, I get you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries. But like how they have in some of our United States, especially in the South, reserves of exotic animals, and you get to go hunt them.
Yeah. If having an animal in the cage that you can walk up to and shoot is called hunting, I mean, we're being real selective with our definitions of words now.
But turning that bad, right? With a Biotechnica engineered monstrosity.
I don't know there's any way to turn that good, but yeah. No, it is definitely the logical extension of that.
Well, to turn it good is to turn that animal into something that, your bullets hit it, and guess what? Its SP is a 15.
Turn it good is to feed the hunters to the animals. That's how you turn that good.
Again,
and that is not to say I have any problem with legitimate hunting. Like, if you want to go out in the wild and find a deer to feed your family, I'm okay with that. Sport hunting, I'm not okay with. And I'm definitely not okay with with that kind of reserve hunting.
Yeah.
Like, just no.
And I agree with you. However, to turn it good is to turn that Biotechnica animal into something that has, an SP of 15 for its hide, and you're given, 9mm to go and hunt it. And it's been, genetically to have razor sharp or extraordinary nano razor sharp claws that almost turns it into a monofilament claws, that basically you're no longer the hunter, but you are the huntee.
All right. I spoke about R. Talsorian's love of inserting anime references into stuff. There was one of the background characters on page 307, Kenshiro Seiba. I love that. That is a reference to both Fist of the North Star and City Hunter. So that made me chuckle. There's a new corporation, one of the new corporations, the one run by Arasaka's granddaughter. It's called Danger Girl, and my first thought was How Very Wildstorm. Yeah, I love references like that. I do. That is in fact, like the Kenshiro Seba guy. That is in fact how I name half of my NPCs and my personal player characters. Is I'll like take the names of two fictional characters that I really dig and mix them together like that. So thumbs up. The idea of speaking of nomads, sorry, I should have brought this up earlier, but nomads are running orbital flights, and the idea of nomads in space just again, I don't know how I feel about that. It's a neat idea, and I guess
they're high raiders, aren't they?
With the setting, but it's
sure. They definitely have them. I mean, I currently have.
They're Beltaloras.
Exactly. Right? So there definitely exists. I mean, even in deep space, they talk about them, right? Is these group of people who find a lab or other space facility that they kind of take over.
No, I get it. Like in the Red, like I said, in context with what they've done with Red, it makes sense. It takes me a minute to get my brain to wrap around that idea of my personal mental image of what a nomad is, and have it coincide with what the Red idea of what a nomad is.
Right.
It's just personal adjustment, basically. Man, I like the vendors and the focus on bodegas and the night market. I like that. But they dedicate a whole lot of space to it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I really, really like. I liked the section on housing. That always, like personal player housing, always seemed to be kind of an obstacle for players and GMs in how it works, what they can afford, where it sits, and all that. Like you had to throw some out of game knowledge at that. And if for a bunch of teenagers who've never bought a house, weren't part of their parents' process in buying a house, and didn't pay any attention, like me, it would have come in really handy when I was first running.
Yep. So
the hustle section.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hustle. Go ahead. Now let's get into the hustle section. I don't mind getting into that.
I love the hustle section. With the cyber psychosis rules, the hustle section may be my favorite part of the book. The idea that they're giving us rules that allow for our character to make money on their downtime is fantastic.
Yep. I think it's fantastic for if you're doing, forward in time, right? Of, hey, and for some reason, I don't know if it's just me, but most of the groups, whether it's, D&D, cyberpunk, whatever, the campaigns I usually do, or the adventures we usually do, there is no downtime in between the last adventure to the next adventure. So I've never had to need those rules, but I definitely like them in Red, that you have that ability to do so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with Cyberpunk 2020, I've needed those rules on many occasions, especially when characters, one character's down. You don't want to forward the game too much if they can't take part in it. So a little bit of time passing, it helps. And I don't know, healing, laying low, just taking a vacation, whatever. Downtime is downtime, and it has its place in games. And the fact that there are rules that supplement downtime to where it's not just a time sink, like we're just going to skip over ahead and nothing happens. Like you spend 2 weeks with your thumb up your butt or whatever. I like that there are rules for it.
Yeah,
and with a lot of it, it's stuff that could be going on in the background even while, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be downtime stuff. Like, your character could be, like, passively earning money in the background while they're adventuring.
Yeah, and I got that situation right now with my Cyberpunk 2020 group, right? Not to give too much of it. So basically, they've been hired by a fixer to go and find certain people, right? So they're working on a bounty. However, it takes time, right? I gotta research this person, I gotta find out about this person, and some of the characters, of course, have that downtime of, well, I'm not really involved in this situation. How do you handle those things? And I agree with you that, Cyberpunk Red definitely gives some rules around that. In Cyberpunk 2020, you had to come up with those rules, and that's kind of what I've had to do, is come up with rules of, like, a side job. Okay, what are you looking to do, right? So one character is a solo bounty hunter, right? So he's going off and investigating various bounties. I also have a techie who's also looking for various jobs, so I'm looking at him for kind of like, quick jobs to go and fix certain technologies around, I think his last job was he had to go and fix an elevator in an apartment building in the combat zone.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, getting a price tag on that kind of stuff is good. And with Red, I think the one thing I don't like is the kind of role associated with it, as opposed to a GM looking at the chart and being like, okay, this is how much he's gonna make on this, versus another job, right? And I think from a GM point of view, allowing you, instead of, well, I suppose you can ignore the dice roll and just look at the table and be like, okay, this character needs a little more funds. Let me choose this as his job.
Anytime I see one of these charts, the rolling is optional.
Yep.
Like, it's gonna most of the time I'll actually roll, because it'll just be some random shit going on in the background. But if it's something that makes more sense for what is going on in the character's life at the time, sure, that's what he's going to be doing.
Yep. And like I said earlier in the episode, as a GM, don't always go by raw, right? The rules as written. Go with your instinct.
Exactly.
If you feel like you need to supplement the party with a little more gear because you're playing on a big, heavy operation to go and fight whatever obstacle you're looking for, by all means do it. But also, when you're how you deal with, and I don't know if this is a future episode of how you deal with, like, players' economies, right? Like, so
yeah,
how you deal with a player's economy. And this is something that even in sorry for sidetracking, but in my Cyberpunk 2020 group is, one of the players called up, okay, once we get this people, what's the fallback, right? Or what's the repercussions of the actions we do? Are we going to be viewed as an enemy? Do we need to lay low? Do we need to go and, like, find, alternate identities because we don't want certain corporations coming after us? How many enemies are we going to make?
You can never have too many identities. Never.
Well, that costs money, right? And I don't think a lot of players think about that, and I don't think a lot of GMs think about that, right? What does it mean to lay low?
I mean, they're mostly coming... Most players are coming from a D&D viewpoint where it's just, okay, I need this now, and...
I'm a murder hobo.
Yeah, I'm a murder hobo. I don't have roots. Even if I do somehow get a house somewhere, it's not like I'm ever going to be there. But in Cyberpunk, yeah, you're going to go home every night, most likely. And so that long-term investment, it becomes a real thing that you have to take care of, more so than in fantasy games or anything of that nature.
Yeah, so I think that kind of economy
also
is not necessarily addressed in these Cyberpunk Red or even Cyberpunk 2070 or 2020. I think in 2020 they kind of covered it a little in Wildside, right, where you had the alternate identities and the escapism, and even in the base book you had, okay, change my whole face look. It gave you that little bit of paranoia, or at least to me it did. That, oh, I didn't even think about changing my character's look completely different.
You can change your fingertips, your prints. If you get paranoid enough, you can become a completely different person. Hell, get the right full conversion body, and you can change yourself from one day to the next.
And I think that's something that Cyberpunk 2020 kind of stressed, but Red doesn't stress, is that you have mega corporations, right? If you go against the corporation, they're going to come hunting after you. They're going to put a contract on you, and that comes with the fluff, right? Yes, mega corporations aren't as big as they used to be, but they still have the adversity. I'm trying to think of the word.
Adversarial?
Adversarial, but it's a specific world about I am a predator and I'm going to come in and consume you. So basically, a corporation is definitely not going to leave around loose ends, right? Because they don't want loose ends. They don't want enemies to exist. They don't want, those.
But at the same time, unlike, say, organized crime, they're only going to pursue that as long as it's cost effective. Like, if you make it more expensive for a corporation to keep coming after you, even if that expense is just, well, I'm just going to go disappear. If you disappear, most corporations are just going to be like, well, he's not our problem anymore. He's not here making a problem, so we're not going to care unless he pokes his head up, and then we'll stomp him down like a bug.
And I agree with that. Oftentimes I watch like certain movies, and it's like, okay, you just wasted 30 men to go and kill this guy, and he killed 30 men. How much did that cost you?
Yeah. How many more men do you think you're gonna get to sign up for that job?
I get that there is definitely a cost effective, right? But again, it depends upon the character, right? And like how cost effective it is. If they kill a certain amount of adversaries you send after them, they're eventually going to be like, okay, we're going to wait.
Like, right? Eventually you just leave John Wick alone.
Yeah.
Like, you just do. Like, because none of your guys are going to want to go fight that guy. Like, what do you mean he killed like that entire crime family single-handedly? You want me to go fuck with that dude? Oh. No, I don't care how many guys you're sending me with. He didn't care about that. No, I'm going to leave that guy alone. So, really, what you should do is stop pissing him off, because he's going to come after you eventually.
Yeah. So we're about an hour and 40 minutes into this. So I think the last bit of fluff we can probably talk about is the city map. And what are your feelings on what they did with the city map?
It's not the 2020 map. It doesn't line up at all. Which was kind of disappointing, because, again, people spent years and years of their... The Night City sourcebook is one of the greatest sourcebooks. It's the best city sourcebook I've ever seen, outside of... there's a Bard's Gate sourcebook. I forget who put it out. Frog God Games, maybe? I don't know. Some side company put out a supplement called Bard's Gate. That's the only thing I've ever seen that comes close to the Night City sourcebook. I love that book. And for it to suddenly be pretty much wholly useless, because now the gangs that do survive into 2045 or even 2077 don't resemble the 2020 gangs at all. The police don't really seem to be a thing at all in 2045. Like, there's a lawman class, but it's really unclear who most of them are actually working for.
Yeah,
I don't know. The map, in comparison to the Night City sourcebook, the map seems underdeveloped.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that it gets its own sourcebook.
And to me, the map kind of tried to fit into 2077, right?
Yeah, they're trying to show a logical progression from the 2020 map to the 2077 map. Like, this is kind of how that takes place and how the structure changes so dramatically. And I get that. And certainly the video game gives us the city information that the Night City sourcebook did. But again, it's not the same map as 2045, so...
Yeah.
2045 just seems kind of in limbo in between.
And to my view, it seemed like they took it and basically I would say, reduced it dramatically. And I understand where they're going for, right, is to blend it into 2077. However, I think Altarsorian really needs to view 2077 as its own animal, right, versus what 2020 had.
I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I imagine that there is at least some degree of corporate decree that's all like, you need to make, if you're putting out a new thing of Cyberpunk, the role-playing game, it needs to kind of fall in line with Cyberpunk, the video game. I imagine that there's some level of cooperation there that, you know, they're trying to fit together.
Yeah. And to me, it just seems like by reducing it, you're reducing the ability for the referee to make certain parts of the city their own, right?
Yeah.
Because now you're mapping it out completely. Of like, here's where this is, here's where that is, here's where that is. And you don't have that in Night City guide. You know, okay, you had probably maybe a tenth of the section of the...
Yeah, the actual Night City guide itself is a small, tiny portion of the city.
So, as a GM...
Like, it's just...
I've kind of like, and I've taken and again, the whole community created that, was it the amalgamation?
My amalgamation map?
Yeah,
the one that I created from
yes.
the...
Yes.
Oh, the French map. Yeah, the French map is nice. I like that.
And even your map.
He was originally, like, I was in contact with that guy, and he was originally going to redo the French map with, like, a computer program, like, section by section. I don't know whatever happened to that. I assume the guy just got busy with life.
There's
but it
actually
never go anywhere.
A website. I don't know if I have it on here, but there is a website.
But it was the French map that made me create the giant amalgamated map.
Yeah.
Night City District map.
I use that map a lot. Because everything from city center is basically, combat zone, and hey, any character who's living in the combat zone, here's your section, right? And if you've actually looked at my news on my site, so I have a WSN news in which I reference some of the districts you've created.
Nice.
Yeah, so go check
I'll have
it
to
out.
take a closer look at that. I will do that.
So, I think we should.
I like the short stories that.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was
going to say I like the short stories that Artel Sorian puts out as in their supplements, the Never Fade Away and the follow-ups in Red. It's weird that they're presented as adventures when it's. I've never been able to figure out exactly how one would like. Yeah, I just always thought that was weird. It was nice. It's good fiction. Just yeah.
Yeah. So
and I like the detailed character sheets.
I think we're winding down with Red. So I think
I think we've about covered everything.
Going to get into our final thoughts. So do you want me to go first, or you want to go first?
I can go first.
All right.
My final thoughts are Red is absolutely beautiful. Like, the art is just phenomenal. That's not to say I didn't love a lot of the art from 2020. I mean, a lot of that art is just utterly fantastic. It holds up to this day. It will always hold up. Works by Chris Hockabout especially. I mean, it's just superb. On the same token, a lot of the rules, I like the updates that they've done. I like a lot of, like I said, the cyber psychology rules, the hustle rules. I like the housing rules. There are a ridiculous amount of charts in the book. I think they could have probably cut those down a bit. A lot of the charts are really overly specific. But I can see what they were trying to do, and it works. In the end, I like a lot of what they did with Red. I would recommend it to the modern gamer. The modern gamer, this is going to sound like a gross generalization, but modern trends in gaming have really moved towards a more simplified system. People like simpler rules these days. That is not where my interests lie. I prefer a more complex series of rules that I can either use the rule or not, but if I need it, it's there. Which is why I created Interlock Unlimited. I prefer the setting of 2020, even though the year makes that kind of redundant. it's its own thing. I like Red. I would recommend it. I personally am still going to be using Interlock Unlimited rules because I made the system. It's perfect for everything I want it to be. I would play in somebody else's Red game. I'm glad I own it. Again, I recommend it, especially to. Yeah, I think I've said about everything I need to say.
All right. So my final thoughts on Red is it's definitely a sequel to 2020. There's definitely a lot of improvement to 2020. And I think through our discussion, or me and Wisdom's discussions, we talked
Agreed.
about our takeaways of how we would tweak the system to our own kind of homebrew version of it. Again, I love what they've done with the roles. I've loved what they've done with the special abilities, the simplicity of the combat. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, but I think overall it's definitely speeds up the system. I love the life path. The net running is definitely an interesting aspect. I think it's complementary to what you've done with 2020. And again, to me, 2020 was definitely a different animal when it comes to net running, right? So you're running the global area versus Red, which is very local. And I totally love how they took that into account, that, hey, I'm running a facility. How do I deal with a facility? Love it. The cyberware, I love some of the changes they did with that. The only drawback I have was around some of the limitations of some of the options you were allowed with some of the cyberware that you had more in 2020 versus Red. And apologies, I'm just looking through my list of comments. So overall, I love what they did with Red. It definitely brings it into the future. It's definitely a new expansion to the system. I haven't played a lot of Red. I've played it at some conventions, and I'm currently hopefully in a campaign on Cyberpunk Uncensored. Our GM currently has some issues around his router, but I look forward to continuing to play in that group. But I think from a Red perspective, it's definitely a great child of 2020. Could use some more tweaks. The economy, I don't care for it at all, because of there's certain limitations to the economy and the simplicity of it, especially from a person who was an economic major. Again, he might hear me on this, but I think it definitely, the economy, it's just the one thing I just can't take. But overall, I think it's a great game.
Yeah. In the end, a lot of it's not the direction I would have gone. But I get why they went there, and I do believe that in the environment of gamer and games that we have today, I think Cyberpunk Red it was the right way to go. It's a good game. It is, like you said, the logical progression, a logical progression from the 2020 timeline, and a good midpoint between 2020 and 2077. And I've enjoyed reading it. I've enjoyed talking about it.
All right. So next time we meet, we'll figure out some type of topic. Go ahead.
Lastly, and this is extremely important, Cyberpunk Red has the one thing that it's needed for, that Cyberpunk as a franchise has needed since the beginning. It's got a fucking index. Thank God it's got an index.
Well, even in the PDF, how they have that sidebar in which you can kind of click on the data sections that they have, in which, hey, go to page blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
Love that. Love that.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Whoever,
the PDF is a work of art in and of itself.
Yeah. So whoever designed this document is amazing. I don't know if it was Jay Gray or James Hunt or whoever at Artelsorian, but kudos to you guys. You are the man. Indeed. For doing that. I know the printed version versus the PDF, but still, that ability to look at the little side note and see, hey, we mentioned this, it's on page blah blah blah. From a book point of view, skipping directly to those pages is excellent. So I think
they changed the lyrics.
What's that?
For chipping in.
Did they?
They changed the lyrics for chipping in.
But did they change them to 2077?
It no longer starts with got that metal beneath my skin. I'm chipping it. Yeah, they went with the 2077 lyrics, yeah.
Again, I think that whole situation with 2077 and but we can talk about that in a future episode, because I was actually in a game in, I think, 2014 or 2015 with Mike, in which I talked to him about the whole, what was happening with CDPR, and of course he was very hush-hush, but he was also very excited about stuff, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about
I can imagine.
When I was playing in a game with him. Yeah, so in a future episode, we will talk a little about our gaming experiences, and I think just a free forum of ideas or back and forth between you and I. Because I don't think there's too much else we can discuss, at least right now.
I mean, I can talk more about Red, but I don't think I can fill another episode with it.
Yeah, so I think for now we'll just leave it off here with our Red, and then future episodes, which will happen in 2 weeks. So every other Tuesday, every other Wednesday, we're going to just shoot the shit. Talk about movie reviews, the game, our past experiences with Cyberpunk, probably some game concepts. I know one of the things we got into a debate about was player agency. Maybe we'll talk about that in our next episode. But yeah, that's about it.
Maybe if you guys want to throw down some topics you want to hear us talk about, you can do that.
Yeah, post them on the Facebook or Discord, and give us some topics we'll talk about. And if you guys want our views about it, we are definitely more than willing to talk about them. So I think that's gonna call a wrap, man. I want to thank Cyberpunk Uncensored for hosting us, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Nighty night, fellas. and fellettes.